The pile hit her like a single thing, 4 bodies all at once, and I heard her ribs go on the first impact. The gravel was wet from the morning evolution, and the sound was specific and unmistakable. A snap, and then a grunt she controlled down to almost nothing, and then 4 recruits were pinning her arms and the drill instructor was standing over the pile with his hands clasped behind his back. "Finish her off," Gunnery Sergeant Harrow said. "She wants to be here. Let her prove it, make her quit." I was standing in the 3rd rank watching this happen. We were 12 hours into a 48-hour selection evolution at Ridgemont Training Station. The candidate on the ground was Nora Vane. She had been in front of Harrow's attention all morning, and not in the way that builds a man up. She was older than most of us by 6 or 7 years. Compact, quiet, with a way of moving through the physical evolutions that was efficient rather than impressive. She didn't win the sprint relays, but she finished everything inside the required window, and she never complained and she never quit. Harrow had decided that was a problem. He had made a comment during the first evolution, not loud enough for most of the section to hear, but candidate Relez to my left caught it and passed it back. Something about the roster looking wrong, about whether the selection board had read the age column correctly on her application. Not the kind of comment that gets written down, the kind that gets remembered. For 11 hours he had put her on the heavy end of every paired evolution. He assigned her the uphill leg of every relay. When she was slow on the obstacle sequence, he had the whole section run it again, twice, so that the exhaustion concentrated on her. None of it had moved her. Now she was on the ground with 4 recruits on top of her and her ribs cracked, and Harrow was giving the section permission to do what 11 hours of physical attrition had not. "You heard me," he said. "She doesn't tap out, she doesn't get helped. She gets up herself or she doesn't get up." The 4 recruits on her arms looked at each other. This was new territory. She was not resisting the pin. She was lying flat, face sideways in the wet gravel, and I could see from where I stood that her breathing was controlled in the deliberate way that people control their breathing when something in the chest has gone wrong, and the body's first instinct is panic. She was not panicking. One of the recruits on her arms, Delisle, who outweighed her by 60 pounds, shifted his grip and looked down at her. "You want to tap," he said. I think he meant it as an offer. She looked at him, she said nothing. Harrow stepped closer. "Delisle, I gave you an order." Delisle straightened. He put his weight back into the pin. She moved. The movement was small and happened in the same half-second that Delisle was resetting. She used the brief loosening in the pin at her right arm to get a hand flat on the gravel, and then she pushed, not explosively, but with a steady controlled force that leveraged the geometry of the pin against itself. Delisle's arm went the wrong direction. He compensated wrong. She was up on one knee before he had corrected. Then she was on her feet. She stood in the gravel with her right hand pressed against her side and her breathing coming in careful, measured increments. Her face was flat. Not rage, not tears, not the performance of toughness. The specific expression of a person who has identified the next thing they need to do and is doing it. Harrow looked at her. "Down," he said. She did not go down. He walked to her. He put his face 8 inches from hers, the way selection instructors use proximity as pressure, and held that distance for a long moment. "The section is going to run the resistance evolution again," he said. "All 12 remaining. You're the anchor. Each one of them, one at a time. You tap out at any point, you're done." She said, "Ready." What followed over the next hour and 40 minutes is the most methodical thing I have ever watched one human being do to a physical problem. The resistance evolution at Ridgemont works on a simple principle. The anchor stands at the center of the gravel yard, and each challenger tries to take the anchor off their feet or force a tap out. Harrow ran all 12 of them at her in sequence with 30-second breaks between. He ran them at a woman with 2 cracked ribs who had been on a 48-hour selection course for 12 hours without sleep. Candidate Delisle went first. He had a real wrestling background and 60 pounds on her, and he knew how to use both. He came in low and fast on the first attempt, driving for her hips the way a trained wrestler drives when they want to finish the takedown before the other person can respond. She was not where he was driving for. She had moved a half step offline and his weight went through her position and not into it, and when he corrected and tried the second grip, she was already controlling his lead arm. He lasted 4 minutes. She moved with him through 3 grip attempts and a second takedown try, using footwork that put his weight against itself on each attempt, and on the 4th attempt she was behind him and he was on the ground and she was standing. Her right hand went to her side for the 30-second break. She breathed. She moved it away before the next challenger came in. Harrow sent the next one in. I will not detail all 12. They each lasted between 3 and 7 minutes. Some of them had real training. Okafor had a combative's background and was the most dangerous of the group because he was patient, and he did not overcommit the way the bigger men did. Relez had been a collegiate wrestler with real tournament experience. 2 others had worked the high end of their weight class in amateur competition and had technique behind their size. She handled everyone with the same economy. Observe the approach, read the attempt, redirect the energy, come out standing. The 30-second breaks were the only time I saw her right hand return to her side. During the challenges, her hand stayed down and her face stayed flat and she worked. She was breathing harder by the 4th. By the 8th, her right hand came back to her side between challenges, pressing the ribs the way you press something that hurts to manage it. By the 11th, her movements had compressed less range, tighter, working the essential geometry of each attempt with less margin than the first 4. The 12th challenger was the biggest man in the section, a candidate named Birch who had played division football. He came in heavy and fast, and she took the contact and stepped off the line and used his momentum, and he went past her, and his knees hit the gravel, and he did not get back up for a moment. Harrow did not send another challenger. He stood in the center of the gravel yard and he looked at her. She was standing. Her right hand was pressed against her side. Her breathing was controlled and deliberate, and she was looking at the middle distance with the specific focus of a person who is still working the problem. Evolution complete, Harrow said. His voice had changed by a specific degree, not enough for most of the section to have noticed. I noticed. The section that had been standing in ranks around the gravel yard had been completely silent since the second challenger. There were 16 of us originally, and the watching had changed as the number of challengers increased. By the 6th challenger, the silence had a different quality to it, not the silence of people waiting to see what happens, but the silence of people who have already understood what is happening and are adjusting the picture they have of what they are witnessing. By the 10th, Harrow had moved to the edge of the gravel yard, and he was watching her the way you watch something you did not expect to see and are not entirely sure how to categorize. I completed my own course and made it through alongside her, and for the next 3 weeks we were in the same training section. I got to know her the way you know someone in an environment that strips away everything that isn't load-bearing. She was quiet and direct, and she knew things the curriculum hadn't covered yet, in the way of someone who had covered them somewhere else, at a different tier. I got to know her over those 3 weeks the way you know someone in an environment that removes everything that is not essential. She was quiet in the specific way of people who do not talk about what they know because they are occupied with applying it. She was the first person in any section discussion to identify the correct answer to a tactical problem, and she identified it with the minimum number of words, and then she stopped talking and let others catch up. She had an unusual patience about being right. She did not need the room to acknowledge it. I asked her once where she had served before Ridgemont. She told me. I looked it up when I had access to a computer. I did not find much, which is what you find when you look up certain kinds of units. What I found indicated she had completed a prior selection course, a different branch, a harder course, before she ever walked through Ridgemont's gate. She was at Ridgemont to add a qualification, not to earn a first one. The medical officer confirmed 2 cracked ribs at the post-course physical, 4 days after the gravel yard. She had not reported the injury during the course. Harrow found me at the equipment shed near the end of the week, when no one else was around. "Vane," he said, "what do you know about her?" I told him what I knew, the prior unit, the prior selection. He listened without expression and was quiet when I finished. "She should have reported the ribs," he said. "She completed every station," I said, "in the window and all 12 challengers." He was quiet for another moment. "Yes," he said, "she did." He picked up a clipboard he had brought with him, looked at it, set it back down. "She did," he said again, and his voice carried that change in it again, the specific degree I had heard in the gravel yard when he said evolution complete. The selecting results were posted 4 days later. She passed at the top of the combined ranking, which at Ridgemont is posted without names, just scores, on a board in the admin building. I know it was her score because I saw her walk out of the admin building on the day scores were posted, looking at her feet, not the board. She already knew what the number said. She was thinking about the next thing.